We saw the outbreak of the First World War, and then we went on to see how the battles and how the conflict in this particular First World War has been divided into two significant zones, which are called the Western Front and the Eastern Front. Now, it's important for us to see these fronts and the battles that take place on these fronts in more detail, as we have to trace how decisive these confrontations and the events taking place during the course of the war are based on the fronts that they are fought on. So today we start discussing and start looking into detail the Western Front. The Western Front is the object of vivid imagination of most retellings of the First World War. Almost all decisive battles were fought on the Western Front. And if we ever see any movie depicting the First World War, chances are that you will see a trench like this, and you will see that soldiers are making their way through these trenches and fighting the enemies. So the Western Front not only is an epic retelling of the First World War, it also happens to be the storehouse of all the decisive elements and moments which shaped the course of the First World War. Definitely, while discussing about the Western Front, it's important for us to see which powers and nations were involved in the conflicts taking place on the Western Front. So, on the Central Powers side, we have Germany. And Germany, right over here, is leading the charge against the Allied powers, namely France, then the British Empire, Great Britain, and of course the United States of America, which is on the western side of the Atlantic Ocean. The United States of America would get involved into the war and also the Western Front, therefore, in a very interesting manner, which we would see in this particular video. The Western Front mostly includes the region of Western Europe and the Northern Atlantic. Now, the Western Front is a rather limited region, and it's best showcased by the yellow line over here. This is where the major fighting on the Western Front took place, and as the line retreats or changes, it shows that the armies are either advancing or retreating. Now, the Western Front witnessed most of the battles which were fought during the First World War. And this makes the Western Front and the control over the Western Front as a decisive for the First World War. Now, the major battles fought on the Western Front are the battles of Marne and the Battle of Verdun. Now, the Battle of Verdun happens to be the longest battle of the First World War, lasting between 21st February 1916 and lasting till 18 December 1916. But we will focus upon the Battle of Marne because this happens to be much more decisive. So let's look at the Battle of Marne. Germany was having an overall upper hand in the Western Front, and this was best seen in the first year of war. But among these many German successes, a discussion is important about the decisive Battle of Marne, fought between 6 to 12 September 1914, where the German onrush was brought to a check. An overconfident Germany decided to use its able Prussian army to launch a quick attack over France to break the hopes of the Allies. Thus, German troops quickly marched through Belgium and reached the banks of the river Marne in France, just 15 kilometers from the capital of Paris. This is where they came face to face with the French troops. The Germans thought that this would be an easy occupation of Paris, but they underestimated the alliance of Britain with France. Britain quickly rushed to defend its ally, and it came with modern weapons such as tanks and machine guns, something which the Germans were not ready to face and simply could not fight against. Thus, the German army were forced to retreat back to their borders, and their dream of occupying Paris was left unfulfilled. Thus, we see how the Battle of Marne was decisive, as it brought a much-needed Allied victory on the Western Front, where it was mostly struggling. So we just saw how the British and the French troops were able to push the German troops back into their territory. So this particular German defeat at the Battle of Marne happened to make Germany come to a realization. That realization was that in this modern era of warfare, the previous technique of direct warfare can no longer be engaged.
What is direct warfare? It is the tactic of charging directly at the army. Till now in history, whether you have read the Napoleonic Wars or any war prior to the First World War, you have seen that two armies come face to face and then they attack each other. So they march on their horses or they gallop all the way, and at one point the armies confront each other. This is the technique of direct maneuver warfare. But now that the British Army had just introduced machine guns and tanks, do you think this tactic can any longer work? If you are charging right into the machine gun fire, how long do you think your troops can sustain? So Germany therefore decided to do away with the direct maneuver warfare and introduced trench warfare on the Western Front. Now, what is trench warfare? Trench warfare involves digging up of small trenches or small tunnels where the soldiers can then position themselves and fire at the enemy. If the bigger artillery guns are brought out, the soldiers could easily just duck and then therefore were able to counter the firing. And if the soldiers happen to be tired or fatigued or even wounded, they can simply just retreat into the trenches. So trench warfare became the symbol of the First World War after Germany introduced it. And again, if you see any movie regarding the First World War, you will see many depictions of the trench warfare. Now, in no way was trench warfare any less deadly than direct maneuver warfare. But trench warfare was more well suited to the time the First World War was fought. Apart from the introduction of trench warfare, Germany also came up with its own form of counter naval strategy, or a way to counter the navies of other nations. And what exactly was this strategy? It was the using of submarine warfare, which Germany called U-boats or undersea boats. Now, exactly how were the submarines used? Well, the submarine warfare was primarily targeted towards the British Navy. Now, the British Navy, along with its own naval vessels and other supply ships, had created something called the Atlantic Chain, which connected the United States of America all the way till the British ports. And this was a pride for Britain. Now, the submarine warfare introduced by Germany was aimed at disrupting this Atlantic chain of Britain. Now, Germany would strategically position these U-boats near the British coasts. So, whenever a British ship or any ship that is moving towards the British ports are coming in, these U-boats would then fire torpedoes or underwater missiles toward these ships so that they happen to sink and therefore never make their way into these British ports. Now, this happened to severely affect Britain, as Britain was a navy centered power. So, if you happen to hit the navy of Britain, you happen to hit Britain at its core. Now, let us look at this question. Germany relied heavily on something to disrupt the British Navy. Now, can you help me fill in this particular blank? Did Germany rely heavily on tanks? Was it heavily reliant upon machine guns? Did it rely on submarines? Or were it the cargo ships that Germany relied heavily upon? The correct answer is submarine. So, Germany relied heavily on submarines to disrupt the British Navy. So, by this particular submarine blockading strategy which Germany came up with, where is to blockade any ship which is moving into the British ports and then sink it, it was able to gain a lot of control over the Western Front. Germany almost became an undisputable leader on the Western Front. The Allied powers, due to this particular strategy, were not able to counter Germany on the level they wished to. Now, any time a ship used to spot a U-boat, there was an environment of fear. So Germany was able to get this particular fear into the hearts of any ship that's sailing on the Atlantic Ocean. But little did Germany know that by this heavy reliance upon the U-boats and the fact that it was sinking any ship that's moving into the British ports, it's about to now enrage a demon that's going to change the course of war. Now, what demon am I talking about? Are we going to shift from the First World War to Greek mythology? Well, not really. The demon I am trying to mention over here is a very powerful country which now will enter the fold of war. Have you ever seen game shows and then seen how wildcard entries are then brought forward? Now, these wildcard entries have the potential to alter the entire course of the game and also change the result by emerging out of nowhere. So now that we have seen many particular highlights of the Western Front, it's now time to look at this particular wildcard entry into the First World War, which happened on the Western Front. And this particular wildcard entry happens to be the entry of the United States of America in the war. Now, the question comes, where was the United States of America till now? Well, the United States of America had a foreign policy till the year 1915, which mostly relied upon isolation. So what USA thought is that it is not at all involved into Europe or any European warfare. So neither did it have much to gain as it had no strategic allies or prospects in Europe, nor did it have anything to lose as it had no interest in Europe anyway. So what USA wanted to do was rather focus upon nation building and stay out of any needless warfare which does not affect them. So that is why the United States of America had adopted a neutral stance till the year 1915. Now, getting back to the German U-boat strategy. So, as I already have mentioned, the German U-boats not only just attacked the naval ships of Britain and its allies, it also attacked the ships from neutral countries which were heading to Britain. And these ships often were not even naval vessels, they were cargo or passenger vessels. And this also was the case of vessels heading from USA to Britain, as USA was a close ally of Britain. It might not have been a war ally, but it was helping Britain by sending it financial resources and important supplies. So such is the background which brings us to a particular event that changed the course of war. So a British ship called the Lusitania was moving from New York to London, and on its way it was sunk by a German U-boat. Now this particular ship was only carrying passengers, of which 128 American passengers were killed in this particular attack. This ship had nothing to do with any naval efforts, and this happened to enrage the Americans. Now this particular incident led to the rise of enormous anti-German sentiments in USA, particularly among the US public. They felt that Germany simply could not respect their neutrality and now were taking precious and innocent American lives for no reason whatsoever. This led to anti-German riots in the various cities of the United States of America. Now, not only the public, even the US Congress, which happens to be the parliament of the United States of America, even they wanted Germans to pay for their actions, because even they felt that Germany not only happened to disrespect basic naval laws, it also happened to violate human rights, where it had taken away the lives of innocent people who had nothing to do with a war which other countries were fighting. Now, when United States of America urged Germany to apologize and make amends towards this particular incident it caused, Germany remained indifferent. It still went on with its submarine blockading strategy and was still sinking ships, most of them which had nothing to do with the war. So now USA knew that this particular thing had to be stopped, or more and more such incidents would take place. So USA finally decided to then declare war on Germany. So as of 6th April 1917, USA was at war and had entered the First World War. When the US president addressed his public, he said that this would be the war to end all wars. And the US entry into the war would change everything about the First World War. Well, the US entry not only brought precious resources which the USA had an abundance of, it also brought the US troops. Now, the US troops were large in number, well trained, and also were ready to fight against the menace that Germany was being. Thus, the US entry changed the entire course of war and led to an Allied resurgence. As you know, that the Allied powers were not able to counter Germany on a level they were wishing to do. But with the entry of USA, this was about to change and the Allied powers were about to gain an upper hand.
So in this video, we were able to trace all the important events and battles that took place on the Western Front and how some of these events
Were also crucial in altering.
and deciding the course of the war. So we started our discussion by stating that Germany was having an overall upper hand in the war and the Allied nations were in fact struggling against the onrush of the German troops. This, however, was changed for a brief period after the Battle of Marne. So in the Battle of Marne, Germany decided to launch a quick occupation of France. But in this battle, which was fought between 6 September and 12 September 1914, the Anglo-French coalition was able to push the German troops back to their borders. However, the Battle of Marne did not end the German menace.
In fact, Germany restructured and re-strategized their entire war effort.
And now they started focusing on trench warfare and submarine warfare. The latter, which was submarine warfare, became extremely important for deciding the German overhold over the entire Western Front. Through this submarine warfare, Germany could actually keep the Allied nations at bay, particularly the British forces,
Who were
heavily reliant on its navy. But this over-reliance on its submarine warfare made Germany a new enemy. This happened in the year 1915 when a German U-boat or a submarine sunk down a passenger ship called the Lusitania. The Lusitania was on its way from New York to London and was carrying many passengers. Now, most of them died in the sinking of the Lusitania, and many of these passengers happened to be Americans. Now, this created a ripple effect in the fabric of the First World War, and it would cause an event which would change the entire course of war later on. Now, moving on, we see another very decisive battle which we discussed about, known as the Battle of Verdun. Now, in the Battle of Verdun, which lasted between 21st February and 18 December 1916, we see Germany and France constantly trying to take on the Verdun territory. Each force is becoming successful for a brief period of time till the other force comes in and captures that. Now, the Battle of Verdun was the longest battle fought in the First World War and was also the most expensive. Now, these battles are one of the most important battles which were fought on the Western Front in the First World War. But our discussion truly came to a proper conclusion when we discussed
the most significant event that took place on the Western Front.
You see, the event which I mentioned, which took place in 1915, which is the attack on Lusitania, it created a ripple effect which caused an eventual outcome on 6 April 1917.
After the attack on Lusitania,
The American public were enraged. Despite America's neutrality in the war, Germany had sunk down a ship which carried American passengers. Germany did not even care to apologize to America, and it continued with its dangerous submarine countering strategies. This finally made America realize that Germany had to be stopped, and therefore they decided to enter into the war. So on this day, USA declared war on Germany, thus bringing USA into the fold of the First World War. This was extremely decisive as it brought the Allied forces much needed weapons, troops and resources, and would eventually be a very important outcome while tracing the end of the war. So that brings us to the end of this video. In the next video, we would be looking at what's happening on the other front, the Eastern Front, and also tracing the various events, battles, and happenings that took place on that front which are contributing to the course of the war and leading to the outcome of it.
don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at deltastep.com or download the DeltaStep app to learn one-to-one with our amazing teachers or to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly. Learn via games and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it is rewarding too. So register for free now.